Some adults don't fear love. They fear what love turned them into. When trust becomes a weapon and affection becomes a wound, walking away feels safer than holding on. This is the psychology of those who stopped wanting love, because love stopped feeling safe. Some adults don't avoid love because they suddenly changed or turned cold overnight. It happens slowly, quietly, over years of emotional erosion. Their mind starts rewriting the meaning of closeness long before they ever admit it out loud. When someone who once loved deeply begins to fear the very thing they used to crave, it's not a preference, it's a psychological scar. Love becomes a place where they've been ambushed before, a room filled with memories that still echo even when the door is closed. And with every disappointment, every betrayal, every moment where their softness was used against them, their nervous system begins to treat intimacy as a threat rather than a comfort. They start noticing patterns. Every time they opened up, someone walked in with promises but left with pieces of them. Every time they trusted, something broke. Every time they let someone close, it ended with a sharp reminder that vulnerability has a price. And the brain remembers pain more vividly than joy. So it adapts, it learns, it protects. It builds a subtle fear that rises any time someone tries to get emotionally close. Not a dramatic panic, just a quiet alarm, a whisper saying this could hurt again, this could ruin you again, this could be another story that ends with you alone, wondering why you ever let your guard down. Over time, the body reacts before the mind even understands. They flinch at affection, they withdraw from warmth, they shut down during moments that should feel safe. They're not trying to reject love, they're trying to avoid the emotional ambush they've survived too many times. Love becomes a battlefield where they've already lost too much. So now they stay distant not because they want to, but because distance feels like survival. They've learned that if they never let anyone close enough to matter, no one can hurt them deeply enough to break them. It's not dramatic, it's not loud. It's quiet self-protection disguised as independence. They convince themselves they're better off alone, but beneath that rational logic is a much deeper fear, the fear of losing control. Because when they fall in love, they give too much, they feel too much, they break too easily. And they're tired of rebuilding themselves from the same ruins. They're tired of handing their heart to people who hold it carelessly. So now they guard it like something fragile, something that can't survive another fracture. Their mind decides the safest option is not to play the game at all. They start choosing solitude because it doesn't betray them, silence because it doesn't disappoint them, predictability because it doesn't hurt them. They numb themselves before anyone else has the chance to. They shrink the emotional space where love could exist until there's no room left for anyone but themselves. And they'll call it peace, even when it's loneliness wearing a mask. They'll call it strength, even when it's fear pretending to be wisdom. They'll call it clarity, even when it's trauma sculpting their decisions. And yet, deep inside, the longing never fully dies. It just hides. It becomes smaller, quieter, buried under layers of self-defense. They still want connection, but they want it without the risk, without the exposure, without the possibility of shattering again. But that's not how love works. Love demands the very thing they're most afraid to give, vulnerability. So they turn away from it before it can turn into another wound. In their world, love isn't a promise anymore. It's a memory of pain they refuse to relive. Because some adults don't avoid love, they avoid the version of themselves love destroyed. Emotional numbness doesn't arrive with a warning. It creeps in slowly, almost gently. Like a defense mechanism the mind builds without asking for permission. For adults who say they don't want love anymore, it's rarely because they never cared. It's because they cared too much, too deeply, too recklessly. There comes a point where feeling becomes exhausting, so their mind does the only thing it knows to do. It dims the emotions until everything feels bearable again. Not better, just quieter. At first, they don't even notice it. They tell themselves they're just tired, just busy, just overwhelmed. But gradually, the emotional colors of life start to fade. Moments that should feel warm barely register. Compliments don't touch them. Affection doesn't penetrate. Even the idea of love feels distant, blurry, almost imaginary. Their heart becomes something they observe from the outside instead of something they live inside. And the scary part is, numbness feels safe. It feels like control. It feels like relief. Because when someone has been hurt enough times, their nervous system learns to blunt the impact before it even arrives. They stop reacting to disappointment because they expect it. They stop craving closeness because closeness has a history of hurting them. They stop feeling strong emotions because strong emotions once dragged them into places they barely escaped from. What used to be passion becomes caution. What used to be excitement becomes indifference. What used to be emotional depth becomes emotional survival. People around them might call them cold or detached, but they're neither. They're exhausted. They're emotionally overstretched. They're carrying memories that still sting when touched. So their mind gives them a gift wrapped like armor, numbness. And once that armor hardens, love struggles to get through, not because they don't want it, but because their heart has forgotten how to stay open without breaking. Numbness becomes their default setting. They respond logically instead of emotionally. They choose distance over connection. They prefer solitude because solitude demands nothing from them. It's not that they don't understand love. They understand it too well. They understand how it can transform you, lift you, heal you, and then leave you shattered without warning. And after feeling that kind of collapse, the ability to shut down becomes a kind of power. They learn to stay calm when others would feel panic. They learn to walk away when others would fight. They learn to keep their emotions in check, tightly sealed, because every time they opened the door before, someone walked in and rearranged the room without their consent. Now their emotions live behind a lock they rarely unlock. And even when they try, the key doesn't fit the same way it used to. People try to love them, but the love doesn't land. It hits the armor and falls flat. They appreciate the gesture, but it doesn't reach their core. Their heart responds with silence, not because it's empty, but because it's hidden, protected, tucked behind memories they don't want to revisit. And little by little, they convince themselves that this numbness is strength, that not feeling is the safest way to live, that caring less is the only way to stay intact. Eventually, they don't avoid love because it's painful. They avoid it because they can't feel it the way they once did. And admitting that is harder than admitting they're afraid. So they pretend they don't want love anymore, even though deep down they're just tired of feeling everything too intensely. The numbness becomes their shield, and the silence inside them becomes louder than love. Self-sufficiency always starts as a strength. It's born from survival, not pride. Adults who no longer want love don't wake up craving isolation. They grow into it after learning that relying on others often ends with disappointment. At first, independence feels like liberation. It feels like taking control back from a world that once took too much. They tell themselves they're better alone, safer alone, stronger alone. And in the beginning, that feels true. They build routines that don't require anyone. They make decisions without waiting for input. They stop explaining themselves, stop negotiating, stop bending to accommodate someone else's emotional weather. Their life becomes cleaner, quieter, without the chaos that relationships once brought. They confuse this quiet for peace. They confuse the absence of hurt for healing. And slowly, without noticing, their independence begins to harden into something else, self-protection disguised as self-sufficiency. Every time they consider letting someone close, something inside them tightens. Not anger, not fear, just a quiet calculation. They weigh the possibility of connection against the possibility of losing stability, and stability always wins, because they've rebuilt themselves from emotional wreckage before, and they don't want to do it again. They know what it costs to let someone in: time, energy, vulnerability, trust. And they're not sure they have the strength to lose those things again. So they build a life where they don't have to depend on They don't ask for help. They don't show their weak moments. They don't let people see the cracks forming under pressure. They become the type of person everyone believes is strong. But that strength is just loneliness with discipline. They've grown so used to carrying everything alone that they can't imagine sharing the weight, not because they don't want to, but because sharing means risking someone dropping it. Hyper-independence feels powerful. They can walk away from anyone. They can end anything. They can survive everything. But the cost of that power is heavy. They build walls that feel like boundaries. They create distance that feels like safety. They reject affection because affection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like standing in the open without armor. They convince themselves they prefer isolation. But the truth is quieter. They prefer control, and love is the one thing that takes control away. Love asks them to trust. Love asks them to bend. Love asks them to reveal the parts they've spent years hiding. Love asks them to let someone else hold the emotional knife that once cut them open, so they avoid it. They avoid anything that could make them feel small, shaken, exposed, or dependent. They become experts at pulling away when things get close. They sabotage connections before vulnerability arrives. They choose partners who are unavailable, so they never have to confront their own guardedness. They build a life that looks stable on the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. A beautiful room with no door. They think they're protecting themselves, but they're also imprisoning themselves. Their independence keeps them safe, but it also keeps them untouched. No one can hurt them, but no one can reach them either. The walls they built to avoid pain now keep out everything that once made life feel meaningful. They don't reject love because they're cold. They reject love because it threatens the only safety they have left, and in guarding their heart, they lose the chance to feel alive. Hope doesn't disappear in one moment. It fades slowly, like a light losing power after too many nights spent burning for the wrong people. For adults who say they don't want love anymore, this loss of hope isn't a choice. It's a psychological adaptation. After enough heartbreaks, the mind starts rewriting the story before it even begins. It stops expecting joy. It stops believing promises. It stops trusting the illusion of forever. It learns that hope is dangerous because hope makes the fall hurt more. Over time, their inner world changes. Instead of imagining what could go right, they automatically imagine what will go wrong. They don't daydream about connection anymore. They daydream about escape routes. They rehearse detachment long before anyone gets close, because their brain has learned that the safest way to avoid pain is to avoid expectation. They start believing that love is temporary, that people always leave, that endings are inevitable, and the more they believe it, the more their mind defends that belief like a shield. This psychological shift is subtle but powerful. They stop chasing affection. They stop trying to impress. They stop fighting for connection. They let relationships die because reviving them feels pointless. They lose trust not only in others, but in their own ability to pick the right people. They've seen themselves break before. They've watched their own hope turn into humiliation. And now, their brain protects them by convincing them that hope itself is the enemy. It's not bitterness. It's preservation. It's a strategy developed by someone who has survived emotional collapse and doesn't want to rebuild the ruins again. When someone has been hurt deeply enough, the body remembers the shock, the confusion, the betrayal. So when a new person enters their life, their mind doesn't ask, "What if this is different?" It asks, "How long until this hurts too?" This expectation becomes their armor, and that armor becomes their identity. They don't invest in potential anymore. They don't romanticize small moments. They don't read between the lines looking for magic. Instead, they read between the lines searching for red flags, cracks, inconsistencies, anything that confirms their belief that love isn't worth it. And when they find even the smallest flaw, their mind whispers, "See, you were right. Don't get attached." They leave before they're left. They pull back before someone can disappoint them. They numb their emotions before anyone has the chance to stir them. Hope becomes something they no longer trust. Like a door that looks safe but always leads back to the same room of pain. They'd rather stay emotionally neutral than risk feeling everything crumble again. They'd rather feel nothing than feel too much. This mindset becomes their emotional autopilot, guiding their choices without them even realizing it. They don't recognize that they're protecting themselves from the past, not the present. Even when someone good comes along, someone genuine, consistent, gentle, their brain rejects the possibility. It feels foreign, it feels suspicious, it feels unreal. They wait for the mistake, the lie, the shift, the disappointment, and when none appears, they still can't relax, because comfort feels like the setup to a hurt they've already lived through. So they stay guarded, they stay distant, they live safely inside their own emotional perimeter, refusing to open the gate for hope to enter again, because hope once promised them a home and delivered them heartbreak. And the mind doesn't forget wounds that taught survival. They don't avoid love because they want to be alone. They avoid love because hope betrayed them, and nothing scars deeper than broken hope. Some hearts don't break, they lock. And behind the lock, love dies quietly,